Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Hands Where I Can See Them, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by FlyingBlueBirds, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Britt. Hands Where I Can See Them. Chapter 11. And There Was Only One Bed. Naturally, there was a moment of awkward silence between Tally and Alder, both staring at the not very spacious double bed, contemplating how to deal with the issue at hand. Well, to be honest, at that moment, Tally's brain wasn't effectively dealing with anything, except for the raging gay panic inside of her, and even this was not really successful. So while she was still trying to calm her breathing in order to avoid a full-blown panic attack, it was Alder who spoke first. "I'll just sleep on the ground." She sounded dead serious, but Tally only frowned and immediately refused her offer, finally remembering how to speak again. "I absolutely won't let you do that." She pointed at the wooden floor, which had undoubtedly already seen better days. "I mean, have you seen that floor? If you can spend a whole night down there, you definitely won't be able to walk properly tomorrow." Damn it, Craven. Master of accidentally rather suggestive comments. But if Alder had interpreted Tally's words in any other way than they were originally intended, she concealed it well. Instead, she looked at Tally almost offended. "Hey, is that a friendly way of telling me that I'm old?" Great. Tally regretted her words even more now. "No, absolutely not. I mean, nobody would be able to sleep on that floor. I definitely wouldn't. And you're really not that old. Actually, I never even thought about your age before, and it's nothing that matters anyway." She knew she was babbling, but felt a strong need to defend herself and to make sure Alder understood her true intentions. Yes, Alder was older than her, but that had never been something that Tally had seen as an obstacle in their partnership, their professional, fully work-related partnership. For some reason, she really needed Alder to know that, and was about to continue with her rambling when she noticed a teasing grin spreading on Alder's face. "Relax, Craven. I was joking, but way to boost my confidence." Tally blushed and mumbled grumpily. "Maybe I should have shared with Batan after all." Alder put her hand over her heart and pretended to soothe it, her face twisted in pretend defense. "Ouch, Craven. You wound me deeply." Tally only shook her head and laughed in response. She would never admit it, but she enjoyed that playful side of Alder, and it meant a lot to her that her partner felt comfortable enough around her to show it more often. Tally gestured towards the bed, determined to keep the relaxed atmosphere between them and not let everything become tense and awkward again. "Any preferred side?" "I don't care. You can choose." Then Alder turned towards the bathroom. "Do you mind if I take a shower first? I'm dying to get out of these clothes." She pointed at her tight black pantsuit, and Tally gulped, because she realized once more that no matter how good of a fit that pantsuit was, she too was dying to get Alder out of it. She walked towards the bed, desperate to hide that familiar blush that was creeping up her cheeks once more, and busied herself with unpacking her things. "Not at all. The shower is all yours." She let herself drop on the bed and grabbed her phone to send out a couple of texts to Riel and Abigail, informing them that she won't come home tonight. Then rolled her eyes when first Abigail told her to enjoy the night with Alder, and seconds later a text from Riel arrived that reminded her that hotel walls are pretty thin. Tally really needed new friends. She typed a short, snappy reply while watching Alder grab her stuff and vanished into the bathroom a moment later. When the bathroom door fell shut behind her, Tally exhaled loudly and closed her eyes. She was determined to use that short time alone in the room to calm herself down. That plan, however, did not exactly work out. It was as if she could still feel Alder's presence in the room. She could still smell a trace of her perfume in the air and could hear her moving behind the closed bathroom door. She groaned, frustrated with herself, then leaned back and tried to focus on the feeling of the soft covers underneath her, and not on the fact that Alder was probably getting out of her clothes in the next room in that exact moment. She could hear the shower getting turned on. Well, that was definitely not the only turned-on thing right now. But no, she was definitely not imagining Alder naked in the shower, was absolutely not thinking about the water drops slowly making their way down her body, over her shoulders, her collarbone, the swell of her breasts, and her toned stomach. She totally did not clench her thighs together, imagining that she would follow the water drops with her fingers, slowly, curious to touch every inch of her partner's body. She did not waste a single thought on the way she would then replace her fingers with her tongue, how she would let it circle around her belly button, then lower, how she would feel Alder shiver under her touch, would take her sweet time tasting her, and how a tiny moan would escape her mouth in response. In fact, she was so busy not thinking about all of these things that she completely missed the water getting turned off. She was completely startled by the sound of the bathroom door being pushed open a couple of minutes later, and her eyes flew open just when Alder padded into the room. Oh, shit. Tally knew she was staring. Knew that nothing about the way she ogled Alder's body was even remotely appropriate. Yet she couldn't bring herself to look away. Alder's hair was still damp and fell in slight waves over her shoulder, her face bare of any makeup. But Tally's eyes were too busy staring at her legs, her unfairly long and right now incredibly bare legs. She slowly let her eyes wander up Alder's body, and it took an awfully long time until they had reached the hem of the oversized shirt that Alder was wearing, and that barely reached over the midst of her thighs. Tally finally managed to draw her eyes away from these teasing legs and chuckled when she inspected the shirt more closely. Are these the Spice Girls? At Tally's comment, Alder immediately crossed her arms in front of her body, suddenly self-conscious. She blushed slightly under Tally's gaze and looked down on herself. Well, I wasn't exactly expecting company tonight. It suits you. Tally hurries to reassure her, but couldn't help to tease her just a bit more. I just wouldn't have pictured you as someone who would wear oversized band t-shirts to bed. Her partner only shrugged at this and walked closer to the bed Tally was still lying on. Then she raised her brows in question. Oh? What exactly did you picture me wearing? Nothing. Most of the time I imagine you wearing absolutely nothing. What? Goddess, you're impossible. That's not what I meant. I haven't thought about that before. It's just, well, you come across more like a silky nightgown kind of woman. Tally immediately scolded herself. Would it have been so hard to simply drop the topic and just ask Alder about something, anything else? She stared down, suddenly very busy inspecting her bedsheets. Interesting, Alder replied, her voice completely neutral. Then Tally felt the mattress of the bed sink in slightly when Alder dropped down next to her. Her partner let out a relieved moan when her body touched the mattress. That went straight between Tally's legs. Then her voice dropped slightly. You know, Craven, just like myself, my choice of sleepwear is full of surprises. Sometimes, I even wear nothing at all. Tally's head snapped upwards, and she suddenly found it very hot in the room. That's, good to know? Then she got up from the bed, at almost inhuman speed, quickly gathered her stuff, and practically ran towards the bathroom. I'll go and shower. She swore she could hear Alder's low chuckle, even through the closed bathroom door, and forced herself to calm her breathing. Her partner was slowly starting to enjoy teasing Tally a little bit too much, and she was not sure how to react to any of it. But for now, flight sounded like the perfect solution. She leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes, taking a moment to collect herself, then quickly took off her clothes and stepped into the shower. Goddess, this woman would end her someday, probably sooner rather than later. Tally hoped the shower would clear her head and would ease the desire that was flowing through her body. It didn't. Instead, it took all of her self-control and several reminders that Alder was only one very thin wall away, not to let her hands wander down her own body, to take care of that uncomfortable ache between her legs. As a last resort, Tally lowered the temperature of the water drastically. The ice-cold water finally did the trick and managed to wash away most of the tension in her body. When she stepped out of the shower, however, everything quickly went downwards again, literally. Tally's eyes fell down to the pieces of clothes on the ground, and her cheeks turned crimson, flushed, when she realized that in her hurry to get away from Alder's teasing words, she had completely forgotten to grab a bra. She inspected the white tank top in her hands and groaned, completely aware of the fact that her nipples would be clearly visible through the thin fabric. But it was not like she had much of a choice. So she sighed and pulled the top over her head. She quickly brushed her teeth, then took one last deep breath and stepped back into their shared hotel room. To her relief, Alder decided to neither comment on Tally's escape into the bathroom, nor her bold choice of clothing. Still, when Tally hurried over to the bed, she could feel the eyes of the older woman on her the entire time. She did her best to ignore it, forced herself to not look up, then quickly lay down and pulled the covers over her body. Though she definitely couldn't say that Alder's gaze had felt uncomfortable in the slightest. Quite the contrary, actually. It had excited her, intrigued her even. It made her feel wanted, which was so much worse because she knew it was just wishful thinking, only her mind playing tricks on her, and jumping to conclusions. They didn't speak. Once Tally had settled down and simply lay next to each other in comfortable silence until Tally leaned over to switch off the lights. "Good night," Tally whispered softly. "Sleep well, Craven." But sleep didn't come. Tally had shifted to the furthest corner of the bed, trying to put as much distance between her and Alder as possible. Still, she was far too aware of her partner's body next to her. Her own body was on high alert, unable to rest. In addition to that, her mind was racing, processing everything that had happened today. The worried look on Alder's face when she noticed Silver's intense gaze on Tally, Silver's dry laugh, which had made Tally so incredibly uncomfortable. Then there was the name of this bar, Fort Salem. Where had she heard it before? And how was this place connected to the Camarilla killer? Then these thoughts were replaced by an all too familiar face. Long black hair, strong features, striking blue eyes. Alder. Her teasing words, the way her eyes had roamed Tally's body, the slight blush on her cheeks when Tally had teased her about the Spice Girl shirt. Tally exhaled loudly, then opened her eyes and stared up at the ceiling. Maybe everything would calm down when she would just stare hard enough. She actually got so busy counting the tiles on the ceiling that the sudden sound of a soft voice next to her almost made her startle. "Craven, you're thinking too loud again." "I can't sleep." She heard Alder shift next to her, but still kept her own gaze fixed upwards, resisting the temptation, resisting the urge. "Want to tell me what's going on in your head?" You. Always you. There was no way Tally would share her actual thoughts, though. Instead, she let out a quiet huff. Too much. She finally gave in and turned her head, only to find a pair of blue eyes already staring at her. "I'm sorry that you're not able to get the rest you need." Alder smiled apologetically. "You know, I can always still move over to the floor. I'm sure my old bones will survive one night." "No, that's not it. I don't mind sharing a bed with you." Tally bit her tongue, suddenly very glad the dim light in the room wasn't revealing her facial expressions. "I mean, it's not your fault. I would still be wide awake when I'd be on my own." That seemed to reassure Alder slightly. "Still, this is quite the unusual situation." She paused, chose her next words carefully. "Probably not what you had expected when you took the job." Tally almost blurted out that she was definitely not complaining, but caught herself right in time. "Well, there's a lot of stuff happening that I did not plan. Me starting to crush on you, hard, for example, or that constant need to be close to you. You know, with all that crazy serial killer stuff happening and everything, Alder hummed in agreement, then let out a quiet sigh. That's not how this job usually is, though. That's not how it should be. Actually, this partnership is not how it should be. Tally's breath hitched at this. Alder's words were unexpected and somewhat stung. Had she done something wrong? A sudden wave of panic washed over her when she blinked at Alder through huge brown eyes. What do you mean? Sorry, this came out wrong. I enjoy working with you. Tally felt her body relax when Alder's voice immediately softened, then immediately tensed up again when she let it drop slightly, whispering her next words. More than I should be. She didn't give Tally any time to process her words and continued to explain herself. It's just that I haven't worked with someone on a case this closely together in a long time. Ever since... She didn't finish the last sentence, but she didn't have to. Batan? Tally watched Alder nod slowly in the dark, and almost immediately that ping of jealousy was back in her stomach, nagging on her. She chose her next words carefully, fully aware that she was pushing it, but not able to hold it back. What exactly happened between you two? I mean, did you ever... sleep together? Alder sounded slightly bitter, but Tally took it as a good sign, that she was still looking at her, not giving her any indication to drop the subject. I was going to say get romantically involved. Well, close enough, especially since the answer to both questions is the same. No. No? Tally lifted her head from the pillow and looked at Alder, not even trying to hide her surprise. That was definitely not the answer she had expected. No, we haven't slept with each other, and no, we never got romantically involved. I can't say that Nicta didn't want to, though, at least for a while. I guess we both did, sort of. Alder let out another small sigh and turned around fully, so that she was now laying on her side, facing Tally. Then she started to explain. Nicta had been my first partner, and we worked together for years. We grew closer, started to talk outside of work, became friends. She'd been one of the few people who seemed to understand me, one of the few people I trusted. We worked well together and solved many cases, but there always was a certain tension between us, an attraction that I decided to ignore, but Nicta at some point wanted to explore. But I couldn't. I was still so young and had my whole career in front of me. I just didn't want to risk it. So I did what I do best. I pushed Nicta away. The bitter sound of Alder's voice hit Tally hard. There it was again, that self-hatred, that regret, that seemed to have her partner completely in its grasp. I distanced myself from her, slowly at first, and for a while things were still good between us, slightly strained, but good. But then we were assigned to the Camarilla case, and things escalated quickly. At first I saw the case as my big chance to push my career, to climb up the ladder, but soon it became so much more. I felt like I needed to solve it, no matter the cost. I owed it to the victims and their families. Nicta didn't agree with my approach to the case. She hated my aggressive methods, and how I prioritized it above everything and everyone else. But I didn't want to hear it. I wanted to get that guy, not only for me, but to bring justice to all the girls he killed. Nobody knew the case as well as I did. I couldn't just give up. Nicta tried to talk to me, told me over and over again that she felt like the case was destroying me, that it was slowly but surely taking over my whole life, that I needed to stop. Until one day she had enough. She confronted me one last time, and ultimately made me choose between her as my partner and the case. She paused briefly and closed her eyes before she continued. I chose the case. Tally could hear some regret in Alder's voice. Still, she didn't seem ashamed of her decision. And if Tally was totally honest with herself, she couldn't even blame her for this. She hated how narrow-minded Alder had been, how she let the case destroy her chances for happiness. But she also knew it was more than that she didn't have much of a choice. That case was not something one could just step away from. Nicta requested her transfer the next day, and we didn't speak again after this. Looking back at it, I am glad that I didn't let anything else happen between us. It wouldn't have worked out anyway, and I think that by now, Nicta knows that too. She She saw the doubting expression on Tally's face and tried to explain her words in more detail. Nikta probably still feels like I have destroyed us, which, to be fair, I did. But whatever this tension between us is, it is definitely more about her hurt pride than about any feelings she still has for me. For some reason, Tally found that weirdly reassuring. She still was way too confused by her own feelings for Alder, but at least that didn't sound like she would get caught up in some weird love triangle. It also explained why Batan seemed to be enjoying teasing Tally and Alder, and kept trying to push them closer together, rather than try and murder them because she was jealous. She thought Alder was done talking, but just when she started to formulate an appropriate reply in her head, she added one last sentence. Besides, she's not really what I'm looking for in a woman. That sentence threw Tally off completely. She felt her heart skipping a beat, and curiosity washed over her face. Surprised and touched that Alder decided to share something so personal with her, her next words were out before she could stop herself. What are you looking for in a woman? She blurted out. Hypothetically speaking, I mean. To her surprise, the question did not seem to make Alder uncomfortable at all. Instead, she watched her features turn softer in the dim moonlight, and the hint of a smile started to curl around her lips when she let her thoughts drift away. The spark between Nikta and me was mostly enlightened by us constantly agitating each other, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but she was so desperately trying to change me that she completely forgot who I actually am, and I think that's what I need. Someone who accepts me exactly the way I am and manages to ground me when I'm spiraling, rather than judge me for it. I need someone who challenges me, and at the same time gives me consistency and is my safe place. You know me, Craven. Tally's lips slightly parted when Alder addressed her directly, and she nodded slightly. I'm a mess. I don't like to talk about myself, my feelings, my fears, that sort of stuff. So I need someone who helps me to do just that. Someone who makes me forget my boundaries and all the walls I've built around myself. Alder's gaze was still fixed on Tally, and for a split second, she felt like her partner would add something else. But then she closed her mouth. Tally just couldn't get herself to look away, so they simply stared at each other for a while. Tally hadn't noticed, but somehow their bodies had moved closer together. Their foreheads were almost touching now. That sounds wonderful, Tally whispered, a tiny smile on her lips. And yet will remain a fantasy. Alder's voice was still incredibly soft, but Tally could feel the sadness radiating from it. You never know. Tally stretched out her arm, and when her pinky slightly grazed against Alder's, she didn't pull away. She felt Alder hesitating, but mere seconds later, the other woman moved her hand, slowly linking their fingers. They both stayed silent, afraid that any word might ruin that intimate moment between them. They stayed like this, facing each other, eyes closed, hands intertwined. Tally listened to Alder's calm breathing, felt herself getting calmer and calmer by the sound of it, and finally drifted off to sleep. That night, Tally slept better than she had in weeks. She didn't wake up once, didn't even dream. In the end, it was probably the bright rays of early morning sun that woke her up. She was surrounded by a comfortable warmth, and for some reason felt incredibly safe and protected by it. She couldn't really move, but also didn't really want to. For once, she was absolutely content. When she slowly opened her eyes, however, she got a sense of a déjà vu, because once more her head was buried in black curls, which made it impossible for her to see much. Memories from last night came back to her, memories of Alder sleeping next to her. Tally put two and two together, turned her head slightly, and found her suspicions confirmed. During the night, Alder had somehow rolled over on her part of the mattress. Her body was now pressed fully against Tally's, her eyes still closed, her breathing calm and... Oh fuck! Tally's head snapped up, and the wave of heat rushed through her body when she realized that she and Alder were not only cuddled up against each other, but were rather caught in a tight embrace, their bodies completely entangled with each other. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy the closeness of Alder. She absolutely wouldn't mind staying like this forever. If it wasn't for Alder's left leg that she had hooked over Tally's hip, resting comfortably between her thighs and pressing down directly on Tally's center. She barely managed to conceal a small groan when at that exact moment, Alder slightly stirred in her sleep and pressed her leg down further, resulting in a wave of desire being sent through Tally's body. Her eyes grew wide when she noticed that on top of that, one of Alder's hands had somehow found its way under the hem of Tally's tank top, and Alder was now unconsciously grazing the bare skin, right below her ribs. Suddenly, she was wide awake, her body on high alert, all too aware of the sensation that the contact with Alder was causing inside of her. Tally tried to shift her body slightly, to at least get rid of some of the torturous friction without waking Alder, but this only resulted in Alder gripping her tighter. Tally felt Alder's hand slowly moving upward, getting dangerously close to her breasts, and panicked. Her whole body was suddenly oversensitive, and she knew that if she wouldn't wake Alder, she would be doomed. Once more, Tally tried to wiggle herself out of her partner's arms, this time more firmly. She managed to pull one of her arms free and gently shook Alder's shoulder. "Alder, hey, you need to wake up." She hated how weak her voice sounded, but she was starting to get really desperate here. Alder moaned quietly, a sound that did absolutely nothing to ease the ache between Tally's legs. Still, for a moment, she thought the other woman would finally open her eyes. She even lifted her head slightly, but then only buried it back in the crook of Tally's neck, sighing contentedly at the contact. In any other situation, Tally would have been amused. She definitely would not have taken Alder for a cuddler, and made a mental remark to tease her about that later. But right now, the pull between her legs became more and more pressing and made it nearly impossible for her to focus. So even though it broke her heart a little bit, she started to move her body more forcefully, and when she had managed to sit up, Alder finally opened her eyes and blinked at her in sleepy confusion. Then her eyes landed on her hand, which was still resting underneath Tally's tank top, and grew wide. Realization washed over her face, and Alder withdrew it immediately, as if she had burned herself. "Sorry," she mumbled awkwardly, not quite able to look Tally into the eyes. Tally just waved it off, in an attempt to play it cool. Still, she also kept her gaze down. "Don't worry about it." Then she did what she had already practiced yesterday. She fled. "I'll go and get ready." She stood up abruptly and almost sprinted into the bathroom. Once more she found herself pressed against the closed bathroom door seconds later, her head buried in her hands, desperate to calm herself down while Alder, on the other side of the door, was sitting upright in bed in the exact same position. They made it back home without another incident. Detective Batan had critically mustered them during breakfast, but when she had not been able to spot any hickeys on their necks, and neither Tally nor Alder had made even the slightest indication that they had done anything other than sleeping next to each other, had dropped the subject surprisingly quick. As soon as they were back at the department, Tally almost sprinted up the attic, where most of the case files were currently stored. She was already deeply focused on one of them when Alder entered the room a couple of minutes later, and when she looked up, a triumphant grin lay on her face. "Did you find something?" Alder tried to make her words sound trivial, but when Tally nodded eagerly, was next to her within seconds. "I knew I have read the name Fort Salem before. This is Rebecca Lewis, victim number 3. And now take a look at the name of the bar she and her friends visited only a day before the disappearance." "Fort Salem," Alder murmured in disbelief, not quite able to grasp the fact that they might have actually found something. Tally, on the other hand, wasn't done yet. She jumped to her feet and walked over to the large map on the wall where all locations that were relevant to the case were marked. She quickly added the location of the bar with the red dot. Then she hesitated, took in the picture of the map in front of her, and felt a wave of adrenaline rush through her body. "Alder, I think there is more." When Alder stepped next to her, she only took one look at the map and exhaled loudly. Tally knew they had both made the same discovery. Still, she needed to say it out loud for the realization to actually settle in. "Look at these 2 locations. It's where victims number 5 and 7 were last seen. Both locations are only a couple of streets away from the bar, so they could have easily been there as well. We just haven't paid attention to this before, because there wasn't a clear connection, nothing that tied these 3 victims to Fort Salem. But now that we know 2 of them have definitely been at the bar, I think we need to check it out." It's just too much of a coincidence. Tally realized that she might have gotten a bit too excited and tried to tame her optimism. I mean, it's still not much. Then her hand snapped up when she felt Alder carefully reach out. She linked her fingers together and gently squeezed Tally's hand. Her next words sounded more hopeful than anything Tally had ever heard Sarah Alder say before and filled her with warmth. But it's something. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.